Welcome back to Renewable Rides. In today's highlight episode, we're pulling out one of the most important and, frankly, most surprising ideas from our conversation with author and grid analyst Meredith Angwin. Meredith walks us through a part of the power market most people never think about, how power plants actually make money. And it turns out it's not when the grid is running smoothly. It's when the grid is stressed. You'll hear how natural gas plants can be unable to secure fuel right when they need it most, how grid operators try to patch those gaps with dual fuel systems and on-site diesel, and how incentives, negative bids, and clearing price markets create conditions that reward volatility, even enabling the same kinds of games Enron once played. Meredith lays out in plain language why the structure of today's power markets can push reliability in the wrong direction, and why real oversight, not wishful thinking, is essential for a resilient grid. This is one of the moments that changes how you think about the energy system. Let's get after it.
I remember one of the times National Electricity Responsibility Corporation, NERC, it had a winter reliability forecast. And this was many years ago. Well, it has it every year now. But when I remember being shocked that it said that we were all set in New England because we had lots and lots of gas plants. The thing is, the forecast did not consider the fact that those plants could not necessarily get natural gas. In years since then, there have been lots of meetings and discussion and actual work done on the idea that if you're a natural gas plant, where are you getting the gas all the time? Is your gas supply reliable?
Yeah. We saw that play out in Texas within ERCOT back in 2021 during Winter Storm Uri, where because of the way that they're set up, they weren't able to borrow from neighbors either.
Yes. They had two problems. The first is that they didn't want to put up with some of the things FERC does, so they had limited connections with neighbors. This was sort of Texas being the Lone Star state, okay? But they also had the problem that the neighbors were in the same shape they were. In my book, in Shorting the Grid extensively, is that our ISO New England is actually pretty careful about the customers, about the people who need power. And so ISO New England set up a system where they would pay to put oil on site at some of the gas plants. Now, many of the gas plants are what they call dual fuel. And as a matter of fact, I found when I was looking into New York lists plants as dual fuel or gas in their description. ISO New England doesn't do that, but many plants can use diesel or natural gas. So what they were doing, ISO New England said, okay, we'll give you some money for diesel, and if you actually end up using the diesel and getting paid by the grid operator for the electricity, then we won't give you that much money. But if you don't use it, you'll have it as a backup, and if you need to use it, it'll be there as a backup. And so that worked really well. I have several charts in Shorting the Grid about how the backup was working for that period of time. Well, the trouble is that FERC looked at this and said, you're the grid operator. You're supposed to be technology neutral. And so this business of paying for oil is not something we want you to do. I mean, we know you had to do it, but we don't want you to do it. So stop it, or stop it in 5 years or something like that. Anyway, so, there's all kinds of things like the grid operators thinking, well, I've got to make sure that the power lights stay on. And then FERC is thinking, I've got to be sure the grid operator is being fair to everybody. And then meanwhile, the person in home is maybe faced with a situation where they either can't get natural gas for heating or they can't get electricity. What fun.
Yeah. Well, so that seems like a step towards some reliability. Within the book, you also argue that, particularly in deregulated power markets, they create some incentives that actually favor volatility over reliability. Can you talk about some of those mechanisms and
Oh, yes.
which ones are most problematic?
Oh, absolutely. You see, the thing is that let's say you're a power plant and you're on the grid. Do you like it when the grid is just going along smoothly and lots of power plants are available and they're meeting load? No,
Probably not going to get paid
because
too much.
nobody's getting paid very much. The way you get paid is when things are getting bad. And so the power plants that are very expensive are being dispatched. So what happens is that the way the payments go on the grid is you pay according to the clearing price. So let's say I'm a power plant that can supply at 1 cent per kilowatt hour. There's another power plant that can supply at 2 cents, and there's a third that can supply at 3 cents. So the 1 cent one will be dispatched first. And if that's all there is, the clearing price is 1 cent per kilowatt hour. But if you need more, then you dispatch the 2 cent power plant, and now the clearing price is 2 cents. Now what that means is the 1 cent per kilowatt hour power plant is now getting 2 cents per kilowatt hour because it gets the clearing price. And as you can see, as the grid gets more constrained, then you dispatch the 3 cent one. And what I'm trying to say is the power plants are actually making their money when the grid is stressed. That's when the high price plants are being dispatched. Everybody's getting the high price. And so it's happy days. And, you can say, well, that's how a market's supposed to work. I don't think so. I mean, look, there are many ways markets work, but this particular thing is set up for power plants to really enjoy volatility. All the power plants enjoy the volatility.
And in your experience, Meredith, how is that influenced? Like, how would I perversely monetize that?
This becomes a matter of, accusation, but there are studies or articles that have said that one of the things that what went on in California at one point was that Enron decided that they didn't want to run all that. They had unforeseen outages of their cheaper power plants. So that meant that the more expensive power plants were being dispatched, which meant the clearing price was going up. And so to some extent, it was a win-win for Enron or for anyone who played this game because they wouldn't have to supply. They would say, oh, we're having a big problem with the power plant. And so they wouldn't have to pay for gas for that power plant. But meanwhile, there are other power plants that they did have to pay gas for, perhaps. They were getting the highest price that they'd seen in months. It's a system set up for gaming. And the trouble is that it's sort of hard to prove, maybe the power plant was in trouble and it couldn't be online. Maybe 5 of them were in trouble and they couldn't be online. Maybe 7 of them were. You see what I'm trying to say?
And as we've seen greater penetration of renewables into the grid, Meredith, you talk about how that's distorted some of the price signals, and some of these baseload plants you've been talking about then start losing money and it starts creating these strange dynamics in the market. Can you expand on that?
Well, yeah, one of the things is that renewables can often bid in negatively. That is, they can bid in and say, we'll pay you 2 cents, we'll pay you, grid operator, we'll pay you 2 cents per kilowatt if you take our power. Now you say, really? I mean, can you imagine going into a grocery store and they're going to tell you, we've got a lot of zucchini now, so instead of zucchini being 1 cent a zucchini, we'll pay you 2 cents to take a zucchini. This never happens. I mean, that just doesn't happen. But it happens in the power markets. The reason that the zucchini people can't promise to give zucchinis and give you 2 cents at the same time, and the power plant can, is that the renewable plants have funding that is not the funding from the market, and they don't get that much of that high a percentage of their payments as payment for kilowatt hour. I think I have a chapter in the book saying depending on payment per kilowatt hour is a losing game for a power plant, even though that's what a power plant is supposed to do. But the renewables, you see, they have production tax credits and RECs. A production tax credit is basically, we think that you're a wonderful plant, you're a wind plant, just what we really like, and for every kilowatt hour you put on the grid, then we will pay you 2 cents extra. So that means that the plant operator was thinking, well, how can I be sure to get on the grid so I can get that 2 cents? Well, I'll bid in at minus 1 cent. And then no other kind of plant is going to bid in at minus 1 cent. I'm sure to get on. And then I'll get the 2 cents. And then once I'm on and getting the 2 cents, that'll just be great. Maybe there'll be other plants that aren't on and I'll actually get a clearing price too, Anyway, so it turns out that the subsidies really distort what plants get paid and how they get paid.
What would be your vision for how that would play out? Like, what is the ideal market dynamics as all of these competing technologies come into the grid, especially right now as we're seeing demand surge and the central grid trying to keep up? What would be an ideal model in your mind?
I think that's a very hard question, because you need to have oversight, and somehow or other people have the idea that markets will fix themselves because of the invisible hand or whatever, and so you don't need oversight. Oversight is command and control, and you don't want that. But really, a grid, it isn't a democracy. It has to have command and control. Can you imagine planning a highway system without people planning exactly where there's going to be on-ramps and where there's going to be traffic lights and stuff? I mean, somebody has to think these things through. And if you think of the grid as an electricity highway system, somebody's got to think it through. Now, if you're looking at how could things be paid better, I think being paid for putting kilowatt hours on the grid and for a reliability in doing that. That is, if you've got a kilowatt hour now, you get some money. And if you can promise a kilowatt hour at midnight, you get some money whether or not you need to put it on. I think that would be it.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.